Good morning. Welcome to Miss Evie's history class for the 7th grade. Today we're going to be talking about history of the English language. So please be seated. Your bell work, as was on the board when you entered the room, is to list 5 English words that are not spelled as they sound. Words that have strange letters in them that we don't necessarily pronounce. Yes, Miss Jones. The word bright. Good job. Right up here. Mr. Alton? Trouble. So if we spoke these words with all the syllables in them, we'd be saying bricht or trouble, both of which sound ridiculous to our ears. So why do we have these extra letters or these strange sounds in words that we don't pronounce? Anyone have any ideas? Yes, Miss Jones. Some of them do drop out of usage. Some of them have strange pronunciations that change. And why do they change? Good job. They change mostly because the people speaking them have changed their pronunciation, or we have groups of people leaving, new groups of people coming in, taking control of these different words and pronouncing them in different ways. So for today, we're going to be looking at why English has changed and how, what specifically as well. So please look up at this board, copy down this first sentence. It's a bit strange, I promise it is a sentence. What's the first thing you notice about this? Yes, Mr. Alton, there are a few letters in here that we do recognize. The A, the H, the O, but then we have a few ones that are strange. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to what this D with a T inside of it is? Yes? No, it's not quite a D. It is actually a sort of a D and T blending. So this word becomes than, and then we get this one. This looks like a, close, it's not quite a T. It is actually the Old English S. And so this word is not the, but she. Good. What about this one? Another D and T? Yes, very good. It is the lowercase of this letter. So it is the, we have the S again, this. So than, she, vissa, old, that one's pretty obvious. Englitha, engzitha. Who wants to take a guess as to what this strange letter is? Yes, it has to be a G, just because we know from looking at it that this is probably the word English, Old English. Pretty clever. So we have this strange G sound, and it actually made a sort of a guttural, horrible, throaty sound that drops out of usage a little bit later on. But then we have Old English tonguin. Yes, it is the word tongue. Good recognition. And we get this weird word, aode. Aode. Any guesses? Aode? Than, she, vissa, Old English tonguin, aode. Yes, began. This is a word that we don't have in modern English. It's dropped out of usage as the language changes. And we know this is an S, so it becomes, yes, Mr. Alton, spaken. It is spoke. So putting this all together, even though this looks a little strange, we can still figure out that it is, then this Old English tongue began to speak. Good job. Now, clearly we don't say this anymore. So what's going on that makes this language change into our language? Well, part of it is because this language has more in common with modern German than with modern English. Old English was a variant of the language spoken by the Jutes, the Saxons, and the Celts, all mashed together on this island of England. England is going through a great deal of changes around the year 0 to the year 1000. We have the Romans who come in and take over, and the Romans put the Jutes and the Saxons to flight, who run over to Europe, and then a few Roman changes, Latin changes slip into the English tongue. We also at this time get monks coming in, and the monks between the year 0 and the year 400 try to start writing down the English language. But they have to use some of the old English writing styles because they don't have letters for the sounds that we have. So this sound of g, the monks start writing as GH. Guess where the word bright comes from in the original? Yes, Mr. Jones, Old English. So the word bright was originally pronounced bricht, which is why we still write it that way. But, of course, pronunciations begin to change. So when the Romans left in 400 AD, England was open to invasion, and thus began the invasions of the Vikings. And the Vikings began to bring their own changes to the languages. The Vikings start to bring words with slightly different spelling, like knife, using a K, or sky, egg, rather harsh guttural sounds. But they also bring a few of their own writing or letters with them, including the Middle English thorn. Who's seen this letter before? No, it is not a Y. It is actually a thorn, which is one of the Viking ways of writing the TH sound, similar to this version. So all of those tourist shops that you see that are supposed to say ye old shop, what they're actually trying to do is saying the old shoppa in Middle English. Now, the Vikings bring their own changes, but then the Vikings start settling down around the year 800 AD. They aren't traveling quite so much. They begin to intermarry with the other people in England. And so their languages begin to mix and the changes begin to calm. Until, in 1066, a Norman lord by the name of William decides he wants to conquer England. Now, Normandy at that time was part of France. Unsurprisingly, they speak French there. And so when William conquered England, he brings a whole bunch of French people over with him. And French becomes the language of the aristocracy in England for the next several hundred years. And so the French begin to put their own spin onto English words, and English begins to take over some of the French words. And because French was the language in vogue, we have words like trouble, or as it would have been pronounced in English, trouble, begin to drop some of the letters to sound more French. And so trouble becomes trouble, slightly more French. Also, because this sound was a bit hard for the French to pronounce, it begins to drop out, and people just start saying bright rather than bright. It's kind of hard to say even now. So this second sentence is Middle English. This was an English similar to what was spoken in 1400 by Geoffrey Chaucer. And you can see that we recognize a little bit more of it, but it's still strange. What's similar to the Old English tongue? Mr. Jones. Yes, we still have this strange g letter. We still have a th. And the grammar is a little bit unusual for us. But we still have van she gan to speak in this Middle English that tongue. Notice that every letter is pronounced in Middle English. They're still trying to keep a lot of the original cadence and pronunciation, but as time moves on, people begin to forget how their grandparents spoke it or their great-grandparents spoke it, and they begin to blend in more and more with what they hear, which is going to be more and more of French and Latin. The French also bring about quite a few of their own words into English. So words like venue or abound. And with those words, we get a whole host of different spellings. Most Old English spelling can be fairly obvious. It's spelled exactly how it sounds. So whenever you find an English word where the spelling is a bit wild, it's usually either because the pronunciations have dropped out of usage or it's from the French. Then we get into early modern English tongue. Now this is what Shakespeare spoke in the 1600s. And compared to the rest of them, this is pretty easy. It's still strange to us, but we can recognize a lot more of the letters and the grammar. Again, we want to pronounce every single syllable. So, then she went to speak this early modern English tongue. Notice that we have this small shift of the UE stays from Middle English to early modern English. The early one, Old English, had no UE in it. Where do you think the UE comes from? Yes, Mr. Alton, it is from the French, one of the few things that shift in and stay, one of the many things, sorry. And other changes, other things that are strange to our eyes? Yes, Miss Jones, went, this E at the end stays in usage. And just a few ways of saying it. These days we'd say, then she started to speak English. So just a few word choices, and the verb form changes a little bit. And this is in part because as English begins to develop its own style, once it stops being invaded for a while, it actually starts to invade other countries, which brings about a whole other host of language and word issues. But English begins to explore how great it can be, particularly through Shakespeare and all the poets at his time. They start pushing the boundaries of what English can describe. So, these are the first two lines of Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. It's in Middle English. Let's read it. 1,